Welcome to You've Got This Virtual Interview Skills. I'm Lisa Littlefield. I'm the Dean of the Hood College Career Center, and I'm happy to be here with you today to share you the ins and outs and the processes of doing an online interview. Thank you for joining us, and I hope that we'll answer all of your questions. Once again, please type any questions that you may have into the chat box, and I'm happy to answer those throughout the course of this session. So, with that said, I'm going to ask you to answer some questions right off the bat. I want to know what makes you nervous about virtual interviewing, and what do you want to learn the most about today? I want to be sure I cover information that's the most helpful to you. We are going to watch a video today as part of the presentation, and hoping that the technology goes smoothly for that. So please type in a question or two for me if you think of something. I can certainly tell you that one of the things that makes people the most nervous about virtual interviewing is the technology. And will the technology work? Will people still get a strong sense of who they are and what their strengths are if they can't be sitting in the same room with them? So we'll address some of that. I will say this much. I do think that virtual interviewing puts a lot more emphasis on the details of things. So small, nuanced things that may not be as noticeable during the course of a regular interview, an in-person interview, become somewhat magnified during the virtual interview. So I'm seeing a few questions here. One is camera placement. If you have a built-in camera on your computer, you'll definitely want to look at where that is placed, and you may want to elevate your computer so that that camera is essentially at eye level with you. So that's an important question. The other question that I've heard a lot from people is, where should you look? And the tendency is to want to look at your screen, or even if you can see yourself in the small image box on the screen, to look at yourself occasionally. And you want to remember that the camera is actually the eyes of the interviewer. So it's just as important that you're looking into the camera as it would be if you were in person, to maintain eye contact with the person who was in the room with you. Another person is writing, what makes me nervous the most is if there will be technology failures. Yes. And you have a bad habit of looking at the screen and not at the camera. I have heard of people actually putting a sheet of paper or covering the screen a little bit so that they're not as tempted to look at the screen. I have heard people say that they've put a picture of another person behind the camera so that they feel like they're looking into the eyes of another individual. And all of those might be good tricks to help you kind of overcome what is absolutely the natural tendency, which is to want to look at your screen or to look at that little box that has the picture of yourself in it. Good, good. If you think of more questions as we kind of go along, we're happy to answer those things. And I'm going to move forward with the PowerPoint now. So the purpose of this session today is to talk about what the purpose of the interview actually is. Why are you getting this call? What do people want to know about you? How you can prepare to do your best. We're going to watch that video that's definitely about presentation and goes in depth about all of the considerations for background and lighting and what you're wearing and all of those kinds of things. So that'll be a great informative piece. And then at the end, kind of the practical moves. What do you do after this interview has taken place? And in a normal world that wasn't affected by our current national crisis, oftentimes a Skype or a virtual interview or a phone interview would be the first step that led to an in-person interview. So whether or not this situation kind of goes on for a long time or things go back to normal within the next, few months or so, I think it's important for you to kind of think about that this may be an ongoing way that companies now adopt to talk to you in the future. So moving forward with the slides here. The employer is absolutely contacting you because they want to understand whether you're going to be a good fit for the company or not. Now, you should be fairly confident. If you get called for an interview, it means that they've already reviewed your qualifications and they have determined that they believe you have the essence of what they need or the basic qualifications that are requirements of the position. So feel good about that. But if they have contacted you for a virtual interview or phone interview, they already believe that you possess many of the things that they're looking for. They're looking to see what kind of personality you bring, how confident you are in your answers, and whether or not you seem as though you're going to be a person that fits in with everybody else that already works there. Nothing could be worse for a recruiter than to make a hire of an individual who doesn't get along with the staff or doesn't enjoy the culture of the company that already exists, and consequently that person doesn't work out and the company is back into the hiring process all over again. So definitely feel confident if they've called you, but this is a make or break about whether you advance in the process or not. You'll be evaluating the employer as well, and we definitely want you to think about, asking the kinds of questions that help you better understand the employer. You'll be seeing them on your computer screen as well, and you want to be sure that you get a sense for their body language and the nonverbal communication as well as the things that they tell you in the interview. You'll want to do a lot of research about your company to understand the culture before the interview begins. Remember that the interview is, in fact, an elaboration of your resume. Presumably, you could not include everything in your resume that you wanted to tell this company about yourself, and so this is your opportunity to flesh out those things that you've included as short bullet points on your resume. Definitely keep a copy of your resume on your desk or on the surface here when you begin your virtual interview. The interviewer won't be able to see this, but it would be common for you to do that in an in-person interview, to bring a copy of your resume. The reason you're doing that is if they refer to anything on the resume that you've listed, that if you can't quite remember exactly what you said, you have that document in front of you too, and you can ask for clarification. The virtual interview is a sales opportunity. Like any interview, you definitely want to think about your strengths. You want to be sure you don't miss anything. If they don't ask you questions in the interview that you think may allow you the opportunity to elaborate on what you think you're best at, you want to find points to infuse that in your interview. Another question just came through. Can we still send out a resume to the Career Center to review it? You absolutely can. You can either make an appointment in Handshake if that is not easy for you or you don't have access to Handshake at this point in time. You can send an email to careers@hood.edu. And career counselor, myself, or somebody else in the office will be happy to review your resume and help you improve it so you feel like it gives you the best shot at getting the interview in the first place. Good. So the three big questions that an interviewer wants answered in the resume as well as in the interview. Can you do the job? Can you do the job? Do you have the skills? If that wasn't in your resume, you probably wouldn't be getting the interview. But they want to hear it. So you have to verbalize why you think you have the right skills during the interview. Will you love the job? Are you passionate about the work? That's usually demonstrated by the enthusiasm in your voice and your personal presentation, but it can also be important for you to understand that you have to articulate that as well. Why do you like the subject matter so much? Why do you like this company so much? Why are they your top pick as a company versus some other company that does the exact same kind of work? And then the last question is can we stand working with you? So that is sharing a little bit of personal information about yourself. And most of the questions that you get in the interview are going to be some degree of variant of these particular questions. So let's move forward. Before you begin the interview, you research the organization thoroughly. I've actually worked with some clients who, after they have interviewed, have told me that the company asked them specific questions about what they knew about the company. Now, it's true you can't know everything there is to know about the company, but you've got to have some good general knowledge of their product. Even better than just having knowledge of the product or service is if you have used it before. So if you are a fan of the product, if you've used the product before, please do mention that in the interview. Try not to discuss the competitor products or similar products to theirs. And if they have a strong culture that you've discerned from their LinkedIn site, their website, Vault is a wonderful free resource that you can use. If you've discerned something about the culture, then you want to talk about that as well. So, for instance, I'll use Chick-fil-A as a national corporation that's one of the most robust and popular fast food providers in the United States today. Chick-fil-A is very open about having a Christian-based culture and philosophy about their operations. So much so that they close their restaurants on Sundays because they believe that's a day of rest for individuals. If that's not your background, your culture, if you can't abide by that kind of being present in the everyday work at Chick-fil-A, then that company is probably not a good match for you. So that goes back to that early thing we said about whether or not a company, whether you like the company, it's not just about selling yourself. So understanding the culture of a company is very important. And professors and people that know people who have worked at companies are great sources for telling you, yes, that's an A-plus company to work for, or, gee, I don't know, it seems like they have a lot of turnover and maybe a hard place to work. Before the interview, normally we would tell people to find the location of the building and to maybe even drive the route ahead of time if they were going for an in-person interview. Today, for the virtual interview, we're saying, go ahead and test the link. Be sure that they've sent it out to you in ample time. Make sure you have that strong internet connection or can use your telephone. If you are using your telephone as your mode of communication, you want to be sure that you're not holding that phone in your hand. If you're holding it in your hand, there may be a lot of distracting movement just as you naturally kind of use your body and kind of make hand motions. So find a platform that's very stable that you can rest that phone on. It won't slip off, or even a small stand would work. Do ask about the length of the interview. Know how long you're going to have a quiet venue to be in. And the length of the interview can sometimes also give you a clue about how serious the company is. If it's a short screening interview of only 15 to 30 minutes, then they may be talking to a large pool of applicants. If they, in fact, are asking you for a 45-minute to an hour-long interview, it probably is a degree of indication that you're a top candidate for them and they really want to spend some time talking to you and getting to know you better. Do ask for the names of the people who will be in the meeting. You may not see everybody who's on the call or on the conference with you, the virtual conference video with you. You'll have to follow up with individuals, and the thing that could be unnerving to you in the virtual interview is to hear voices of people and individuals asking questions or making comments that you can't actually see. So do know who's in the interview, and once again, who's in the interview may also give you clues about how serious they are looking at you as a candidate. So if it's upper level management people, if it's the direct report person in the company that you're interviewing with, that's a serious interview situation. If it's a screening interview, do you have the basic skills? It's more than likely going to be somebody that's from the HR department and may not be the final decision maker on who's going to be selected. Good. Once again, if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to type those in the chat box. Now I'm going to try and go to show you a video. So bear with me while I switch technology here for just a second.
Key 1, sound. Having good sound is just as important as having good video.
An empty room like this might sound fine to you in normal conversation, but it creates an annoying echo for anyone listening on video, especially if the floor isn't carpeted.
Basically, the more stuff that's in the room to deflect the sound, the less echo. And make sure there's no loud noises in the background. Loud office conversations, construction, and air conditioning. These will make your interview painful to listen to. Key 2, location. Create a good background. This one is not good. It makes me look like a total slob. This one is too distracting. What's that guy doing back there? In this one, just make sure you don't have anything embarrassing in the background. Keep it neat and simple. A white wall is usually too plain, so I set up a bookshelf like this. You can also use a house plant, a lampshade, a piece of art, etc. If you're at the office, you can set up a clean desk with a computer in the background. Now you're probably using a laptop with a built-in camera or a webcam like this. Notice how the camera is actually several inches below my eyes. So when you're looking through the camera, if you angle it at your face, it shows the ceiling. So you want to stack it up on the box like this. Basically, you want the camera at eye level, because this is the way people are used to seeing you. And you want to be a little more than arm's length from the camera, so you're about this size in the frame. And you want your eyes to be about 2/3 of the way to the top. Key 3, lighting. Good lighting makes a huge difference. Professional lighting uses 4 light sources, but you really only need 1. If it's daytime, you can just use a window. If it's too bright, pull the shades. You need the window to be pretty much in front of you, not to the side or behind. Wow, I think I found the worst interview setup ever. If it's nighttime and there's no window nearby, grab a lamp. Don't use overhead lighting like this. It makes you look terrible. And definitely don't light yourself from below, unless you're telling scary campfire stories. What you want is a lamp in front of you, like this one, with the light slightly above the height of your eyes while you're sitting down. Of course, this one is great because I can adjust the levels, but pretty much any lamp will do. If it's too bright, try moving it back. If it's too dim, just move it a little closer. Key 4, you. Now that everything else is set up, make sure you look good. Dress appropriately, at least on top. You might want to wear makeup. Yeah, even some men do it. And don't look down at the computer screen while being interviewed. Look directly at the camera. Now, this might feel a little weird to you at first, but to the people watching, it looks like you're looking directly at them, which is good. And try not to move too much. Even just a few inches back and forth can be really distracting. So, to recap, find a quiet place without distracting sounds. Set up a good background. Set your camera at eye level, arm's length away. Make sure you have good lighting, and make sure you look good. Now, I've put all this into a checklist for you, and you can find it in the link below there. That's it. Good night, and good luck.
If you think you have any questions about the video, please let me know. Just to review real quickly, some of the things that he brought forward that I think are worth having a discussion about is the ability to use natural light. One of my own experiences has been that the natural lighting can make your face and the room look bluish. And so you may want to use a lamp or some ancillary lighting that has a warmer tone to it. So definitely check that out on your camera and be sure that the lighting is good and as even as possible across your face so you don't have any deep, dark shadows. Have a good background. The background that he showed you had that bookcase behind it. If you don't have something like that, it's perfectly fine. A plain wall would work too. If you are going to have something behind you other than a plain wall or a bookcase or something of that nature, you might want to put something that makes a statement a little bit about yourself. A piece of artwork or something that you poster that you particularly enjoy might be an appropriate thing to have in the background, but nothing too distracting. He also, off to the side, you may have noticed that he had a pillow propped up on, I think it was a filing cabinet that was sitting next to him. That was probably to muffle a little bit of echo that was in the room. So do check your audio, and my best advice to you is absolutely to get a friend to log in, take a good look, and critique your sound, your background, your lighting, all of those things. Once again, your eye contact is with the camera on your computer. And one of the recommendations that I've heard from people who do this a lot in podcasts and video blogs and those kinds of things is not to sit completely straight on in front of the camera, but to sit at a slight angle just to avoid that kind of mugshot look that you might have on the screen. So an angle a little more relaxed, you can see from the picture there in the PowerPoint, hands on a desk might be fine, so that it looks like you're comfortable with the situation and not tense and nervous. So warm up with a friend, practice with the technology. All of those things are going to give you a greater comfort level and make you more relaxed and focused on your answers versus the technology. Good, good. So moving right along here, keep being mindful of our time too. I want to leave time for you guys to ask questions. What can you do to prepare? Because some of the things that we talk about in a virtual interview are, in fact, the same as those things that we'd want you to be comfortable with and aware of, even if you were going for an in-person interview. You want to definitely talk about your strengths. And one of the things that I often recommend to people is prior to an interview on a sheet of paper to actually jot down 3 things that you think are your strongest capabilities. And if you can't think of those things on your own, you can ask a friend, you can ask a professor, you can ask your parents, other people who know you very well to comment on what they think are your 3 general greatest strengths. So for me, that's often communications, interpersonal skills, being kind of a flexible and adaptable person are 3 of my strengths. Now, why is this so important? Well, first of all, you can see from this PowerPoint slide that these are the things that that employers really want in employees today. They want to know that you can work on a team, that you can get along with other people, that you're comfortable with technology, that you're a self-motivated individual, a hard worker. But if they don't ask you questions that specifically address these things, this gives you a great idea about the things that you would want to talk about anytime you got an opportunity to guide the nature of an answer. So if somebody asks you the question, tell me about yourself, you can immediately go to these strengths as things that you'd want to incorporate in that answer. The tell me about yourself question is in fact the singularly most popular question asked by interviewers. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the presentation about how to answer that important question. We know that from public speaking and we know from interviewing research that the things that the employer will remember the most about you are how you started your interview and how you end your interview. So this first question right out of the gate, even if it doesn't feel like a question, if it feels like casual conversation, is extremely important. So you want to give a good solid answer to that that isn't your life story, but tells people about yourself in a confident and strengths-based way. So these are some of the things that you might want to think about. You might have other strengths outside this area. And if you want to practice interviewing at any point in time virtually, and when life is back to normal again, in person in the Career Center, the 4 people that work in the Career Center are always available to you for mock interviewing. So do remember that. Virtually, you can make an appointment through Handshake, or you can email, once again, careers@hood.edu, and we're happy to make an appointment to interview with you virtually too, to practice interview with you. Great. So moving right along, do know the requirements of the job. Nothing can be worse if they get into if you get into an interview situation and they ask you, well, do you have any questions for us? And you're like, well, can you tell me what this person would be doing in this job? You should know the answer to that question already. As a matter of fact, you should go through the job description with a highlighter, and you should highlight all of the things in that job description that you feel like you can do well. Now, people oftentimes do not apply for positions because they read a job description and they cannot do everything that's listed in that position description. In fact, employers don't believe that most candidates will be able to do every single thing that's listed in that job description. That would be an ideal day, wouldn't it? That would be a red letter special golden day if they had a bunch of candidates who could do every single thing that they were looking for. So from the get-go, they are believing that they will need to do some training, that they're looking for people that have anywhere between 70 to 80% of the qualifications that they're looking for. So if you don't have every single thing that's listed in the job description, know that far and away that'll be the common thread between all candidates who are applying for that position. Don't let that be the thing that stops you from applying for a position, and don't be afraid or nervous that they're going to ask you about things that you don't know how to do in the interview. If they ask you, can you do something that you don't know how to do, and let's use computer skills as an example. They ask you if you know how to do a specific database program, and you've never worked with that particular database. That's okay. You have worked with other databases, and you have worked with other technology, and you can answer that question by saying, that's not a specific program or a specific operation that I have performed, but I am very familiar with these kinds of databases, these kinds of programs, and I have no doubt that I would be able to learn and master your program within a very short period of time. So don't be nervous about that, and don't let it stop you from applying for positions. After you've highlighted the things that you feel you're good at or that you've had experience in, on another sheet of paper, or if there's room on that sheet of paper with the job description, jot down some specific experiences that you have had with these things that they're hoping you'll do in this role. You want to infuse as many short stories or experiences in the interview as you possibly can. So know your skills, your strengths, and importantly, know your weaknesses too. Although nobody typed it into the chat box over the years of working with people, I have noticed that one of the big fears is, what if they ask me, what is your greatest weakness? How will I answer that question? I don't want to tell them anything bad about myself. Well, chances are you're gonna get some questions that are around things you don't know how to do or are weaknesses. Don't be afraid. There are definitely ways to answer those kinds of questions that will not eliminate you as a strong candidate for the position. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So moving right along here in our slides, how are you going to dress? I think it was clever the way the guy in the video shows that he had the suit on top and he had his PJ bottoms on underneath the desk where nobody could see them. I have had people say that they have had occasion where they've had to move around a little bit, or something has happened where more of themselves was exposed on the camera than they had originally thought was going to be. There is a value of dressing up for a virtual interview from top to bottom, in that the way you're dressed does oftentimes influence how confidently you speak and how formal you feel the situation is. And let's face it, one of the differences between this virtual interviewing and real in-person interviewing is that you're at home, where things might be kind of relaxed, and you might be tend to be more casual about your answers and your presentation than you would be if you were sitting in somebody's office building. So do be mindful of the fact that dressing as you would for an in-person interview from head to toe could be an important thing that influences how formally you present yourself overall, and also how confident you feel. So the old expression, look good, feel good, applies to virtual interviewing as much as it would apply to going to an in-person interview as well. Good. Do think about important things like whether or not you'll show tattoos, piercings, the kind of jewelry that you might be wearing, your facial hair, if you have a beard or a mustache or those kinds of things, being very neat and trimmed up. Once again, that camera acts as a magnifying glass in a lot of ways, and so you want to be sure that you look good from head to toe. White clothing tends to reflect light a lot. So you may want to think about a light colored blouse or shirt. Conservative tie is still a recommendation. And pulling your hair back away from your face. People are reading your facial expressions. Humans are just visual animals by their very nature. And so you want to be sure that people can see your face clearly. And the camera is definitely going to magnify things. So for women, if you're wearing cosmetics, you want to test that camera in advance to make sure that your makeup looks the same way that it looks in person through the virtual interview too. So very good. Once again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to type these into the chat box. Jewelry, just be sure it's nothing jangly that doesn't make noise and that kind of thing. So earrings, necklaces, and all can be fairly conservative as well. Good. Nonverbal behaviors. Once again, you're at home. You may be into sitting in a very comfortable chair. You might be in your comfy recliner and have your laptop there with you. I would recommend that you sit at a table, that you use a hard-backed chair so that you'll keep your posture upright. Try not to use a swivelly chair. You don't want to be rocking around or twisting in your chair a lot. That's an indication of nervousness, and on the camera that's going to be exaggerated. Do make that eye contact. And remember that people want to see that you're a pleasant, inviting, and friendly person. So in the same way that we would suggest that you smile in an in-person interview, you do want to look that you're happy to be there. You're happy to be doing this virtual interview. You're happy to be talking to them, and that you have a lot of enthusiasm for what's going on. Be sure to moderate your tone of voice a little bit. Try, even if you're nervous, not to be in your upper register of your voice, but in your normal tones. And you can use your hands in the same way that you would use your hands in a normal person setting, but be careful not to be fidgeting or moving a lot with your hands in a way that makes your body move a lot, or that is visible on the screen and makes it appear that you're nervous and that you're fidgeting and you're uncomfortable in the situation. Good. So moving right along, there are 4 kinds of interview questions that you can get. I've worked with many people over the years, and these 4 questions kinds of questions seem to be universal. And so I want to spend just a few minutes running through some of the basics of the questions with you. You may get what we call demographic questions. Demographic questions are basic yes or no questions. Do you live nearby? Can you work these hours? Do you have this basic skill set? Those are your basic demographic questions. They're yes or no questions. And it would be great if every question in an interview was a yes or no question. It sure would make life a lot easier. But unfortunately, there are 3 other kinds of questions which will make up the bulk of the interview. Once again, those demographic questions may be perfunctory, but they've also largely been answered in the mind of the interviewer before they have called you for the interview. So the average answer to a question should be about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes long. For most people, it feels like they've gone on a long time only to discover that their answers are quite short. So I would encourage you to time some of your answers. The 20-second, 30-second answer probably is not giving enough detail to the interviewer to really get a sense of who you are and whether or not you can do the job. And once again, we're transmitting personality through our answers too. So there's that pesky tell me a little bit about yourself question that's probably going to be the first thing that you get. This is not telling your life story to somebody. The tell me about yourself question is quickly moving from a few personal details into an answer about why you think you can do their job. So let's say I was applying for a job in a career center in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I'm from. And I came into the interview and somebody said, "Hey, it's great to meet you today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?" I would start out by saying, "Well, I lived in Atlanta for about 25 years and I have deep roots there. I feel like I know the community and I fit in well with the community and enjoy so many of the cultural and educational and work offerings that the city has to give. I really feel like I would be a great career counselor in your organization because," so you can see I told just a little bit about myself on the front end of that that showed enthusiasm or what I know about the city or I know about the company. But then I quickly am going to move into, I'm excited to be applying for this position at college XYZ because I have these skills to bring to you and you have an audience of people that I want to work with. So think about that for yourself. Practice, practice, practice that tell me about yourself question. The reason why you want that question to practice it a lot is because you want it to come out very smoothly. You don't want to stumble through that question. You don't want to feel like you didn't have a good, solid response for them. The way you start an interview often influences how you're going to do with the next 2 or 3 questions after that. So get very comfortable with that question. Don't get to the point where you're not thinking about what you're saying, but that it comes very naturally to you. Why are you interested in this position? So this question is really not just why you want to do that kind of work. The real question underneath this question is, why do you want to work for this company? So that goes back to our earlier comments about, have I done my research about the company and do I understand why this company is a good match for me? So you definitely want to talk about, yes, why you love the particular kind of work that you're applying for, the skills you bring to it, but why that company? What did you like best or least about your last job? Well, it's easy enough to answer questions about what you liked about your last job, right? It's easy to say positive things in a place where you had a good experience. And that could be your internship, it could be a volunteer experience, it could be your classroom experience. So if you haven't had a job, you can fill in that blank with these other kinds of experiences. The more important part of this question is, what did you like least about your last job or your last internship or last experience? Try never to be disparaging of a previous boss or a previous place where you have worked. Try to maintain a positive attitude. So what did you like least about your last job might be, I loved my last job. It was a great place to work. I had a wonderful boss, but I did not have room for advancement there. Or I was an intern and my internship was coming to an end. If the availability of a full-time job had been there, I would have been happy to stay. So try not to speak negatively about your previous employer or your previous position. You can say, I thought I would enjoy that kind of work. My experience showed me that I liked certain aspects of it, but there were other things that I learned in that position that now have informed me that the work I really want to do is the position that I'm applying for with you today. So that's another way that you can address that. But if you are willing to say negative things about your previous boss or your previous job, the person with whom you are interviewing will assume that you might be willing to do that about them. And it just casts you in a light that you're not a positive person. So definitely be careful. Don't fall prey to that trap of what didn't you like about your old boss, or, did you have conflicts with your old boss? Everybody has things they don't agree upon, but a conflict is definitely something you want to avoid talking about if you can, unless they ask you directly about it, in which case you may come up with an example of a time when you had a disagreement, but not a knockdown, drag-out fight, right? So nothing that would be devastating. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Strengths are easy to talk about. Once again, you've pre-identified what you're most feeling confident about. And I just saw a note from somebody that said a few people are having a hard time accessing the site, do remember that we're recording this session and we will be putting it up on our YouTube channel. We'll send the link out to people, and you can feel free to share the link with anybody who also needs this information or you feel might benefit from it too. Great. Weakness question is, thank you for sharing that. The weakness question is a little trickier. So we want to think about some stories, some examples, again, to answer this question. Somebody said, what are your weaknesses? One of the mistakes that people make sometimes is that they will say, oh, I don't have any weaknesses, or I'm super confident, and I never have any disagreements with people. You want to avoid that kind of answer if at all possible. You want a real weakness, because nobody's perfect, right? But you want one that's not devastating. I'll give you a funny example. I was working with a student one time, and I said, I asked him the question, what is your greatest weakness? And he answered by saying, I just can't get out of bed in the morning. I set 2 or 3 alarm clocks, and I just find myself every morning struggling to getting out of bed. And I quickly said, don't use that as an example. As you might guess, an employer who heard that kind of weakness would just assume that that person was going to be late for work every day. So you definitely don't want to answer in such a way that you're going to raise alarming things for the interviewer. You want to have things that are weaknesses that you can address. So here's an example of a weakness that might be okay to talk about in an interview situation. I'm a person who really likes to be complete and thorough in my work. When I'm given a project, I find that I really get into the details of it, and I have a hard time sometimes feeling like I've thoroughly investigated and included every single thing that I possibly could. But what I've done over time is come to a process of discovering what the priorities are for projects, address those things immediately so that I have a finished product and something that I'm able to share with my colleagues, share with my boss, share with my professors. And then if I have time, I'm able to go back and address more detailed things that I can complement my initial report with. So an answer like that, I'm a very detailed person. I like to be in the details of things. That can sometimes be a weakness and a challenge for me. It's fine to say as a weakness, I've addressed how I approach that weakness, how I cope with it, and how I'm still successful even after I've kind of grappled with what I see as a problem for myself. And that shows an employer that you're the kind of individual then that can work through their problems and is willing to recognize that they sometimes have issues too. If you have things that you have as an idea for that answer to that weakness question, but you're uncertain about it, please do speak with one of the career counselors, either myself or one of the other counselors in the office, and practice that answer a little bit. We're happy to discuss that with you, and once again, tell you whether or not we think that might be a devastating answer or if that's going to be okay for you. So we're almost to the end here. One methodology that people use, so we have the 4 kinds of questions, a demographic question, we have a behavioral question is the second kind of question. Behavioral question asks you for a specific story to tell somebody in response to a question. So they're trying to determine how your future performance will be based upon your past performance and past examples. You'll always know when you've got a question of this nature because they will ask you for that story at the very beginning. So they'll say, can you tell us about a time when you had this problem, this issue, you were asked to complete this kind of project? And anytime you get a question that asks you for a story, you have to be prepared with a story. It's not enough to speak generally. So this is why you want to think about your strengths and you want to think about those little stories in advance that you would tell. So some people use the STAR method, and the STAR method asks you to describe the situation for somebody, what your role was or what you were required to do, what your tasks were in that situation, how you responded to the problem, the person, the lack of resources, whatever the challenge was, and what was the outcome of that. Now, there's one additional thing that you can respond to this kind of question, this behavioral question with, and that is what you learned from the interaction. And if it's hard for you to remember this STAR, an acronym, that's okay. Describe your situation and what you were responsible for, how you responded to it, and then what you learned from it would be sufficient to answer this, but it has to be a specific question. Sometimes that's a class project, sometimes that can be a real life situation. It could even be a situation if you're responding to, let's say, tell us about a time you had a conflict with an individual, then definitely that learning component of it at the end is going to be real important. The other two kinds of questions that you can get, demographic, behavioral. The third kind is, in fact, called a stress question. And people often say, well, why is it a stress question? It asks you to talk about things that you normally don't want to talk about. So negative things, times you were in conflict, a time that you failed, a time that you weren't able to accomplish what you were asked to accomplish. Those could be all stress questions. If you use the STAR method, you will be in good shape to answer those kinds of stress questions as well. Tell us a time about being in conflict with an individual. Could be a clue that that company has situations in which people are in conflict with one another, and that can be a bit of a challenge for you as you think about whether or not that's a place where you want to go work. So it would be normal for that question to come up even in environments where there wasn't a lot of conflict. And a good way to answer that is to say, well, I don't have conflicts with people as a general rule. I get along with most people and enjoy working with others and like being on a team and kind of have a person orientation. But I guess the most recent conflict I had was with a coworker over how we would allocate a portion of our budget. And this individual felt like they had priorities related to their work and I had priorities related to mine. We sat down and we really talked about the overlap of those priorities and how we could use our resources and maybe pool some of our resources to come up with a way that extended our money and our finances to get benefits for both of us. The thing I really learned about that whole interaction was that collaboration is key. Whenever you're in conflict, collaborate, communicate, work together, and try to achieve a situation in which both people can benefit. So I think that is a great example of how I would work moving forward at your company, is to think about ways that I would always respond to others with an open mind and with communications as my first tool whenever there was a disagreement or a different prioritization. So I would say that's probably the best way to respond to a stress question, like, have you been in conflict with people? The last kind of question that you can get is called a case question. A case question gives you a set of circumstances and asks you what you would do under those specific kind of circumstances. And this is an okay question for college students because I want you to think about your classroom experience. 9 times out of 10 in most classes, this is exactly the same kind of questions that you get. Professor gives you a series of situations and parameters and asks you to solve or write a report or investigate those different situations and come up with a solution or an optimal outcome. So college students know how to answer these questions. The key to answering this kind of question, a case question, is to ask yourself, what is the real problem to be solved? Once you have that in your mind, then you know exactly what it is that you need to respond to. So there may be extraneous factors in that case that are not so relevant, but your answer should be, I believe the real problem in this situation is this, and this is how I would address it. Okay, good. So I hope that's helpful to you. And we're almost to the very end of our time and the ends of our slides. So we're coming to ending the interview. Definitely at the end, they're going to say, do you have any questions for us? And if they ask that question and you feel like there's things that you have not addressed in the interview that you want to respond to, this is your moment. So fill in those things that they haven't asked for. This is how this would sound. Hey, do you have any questions for us? And you would say something to the effect of, yes, I do have some questions to ask, but before I do, I didn't get a chance to tell you about the fact that I've had this award or this success or feel like I bring this strength to the table, and I want to spend just a second or two kind of letting you know about that thing. You have some control over what that interviewer knows about you. This is your chance to shine, so you definitely want to fill in any blanks. You absolutely want to have some questions at the end. You cannot, it is not allowed for you to say, nope, you answered everything, I don't have any questions. Here's some good general questions that you could ask. What's a typical work week like? Don't ask, what would I be doing day to day? Remember, we said earlier, you should already know that from the job description and your research. But you can say, what's a typical week like? A typical work week could involve going to team meetings, participating in virtual conferences, webinars, progress reports, a lot of different elements that aren't necessarily in the job description. So I have a good friend who works for a company, and every Thursday is their busiest day in the office because that's their publications day. So they're submitting all of their content for their website and everything, and it's every Thursday. So that would be an important thing for you to know, is what is the flow of work like? Are there special days within the week or special points where a lot of work is due, and that could inform you too about how well you'd like that job. What does the interviewer like the most about working at that company? Make it personal. Get their feedback. Understand what they like, and you know what? They've been there a while, so I would definitely want their opinion. Looks like we have another question that just came in here. When I was going to an interview, I checked some videos on YouTube, and they recommended to ask, is there something that leaves you hesitating about my abilities to hire me? Do you think that is appropriate? That's sometimes called the hard question. I've heard it called that in videos. I've heard that called from very experienced interviewers. Why is that called the hard question? Well, you will feel really uncomfortable asking it for sure, because they may actually say, well, we don't think you have the skills that we need, or gee, it's been great talking to you, but you know, we have candidates who have more experience in this area or this area. Well, let's face it, you're not going to have experience in everything. You can't possibly know every single thing that they might want you to know. And there will always be other people that will have some experiences that you can't have. I think this is an individual answer to this question about whether it's appropriate. Another way to ask the same question is, instead of saying, is there anything that's making you hesitant about hiring me, is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you think is essential to this job? I want to be sure I've covered everything that you need to know about me, and I want you to feel very comfortable and confident that I'm capable of doing this job. So please, at this point, if there's anything else that I can share with you, don't hesitate to ask me about that. If there's anything that's of concern that I've shared with you, I'm happy to address that too. So rather than being so direct, why won't you hire me? Tell me what it is that might make me not the best candidate. You can work around that a little bit to soften that question if that makes you feel more comfortable. You're essentially asking the same thing, but not in such a direct way. So I hope that's helpful to you as you think about it. Is there anything at all that I haven't shared with you today that you would want to know about me, or anything that I may have told you that brings about any kind of concern or makes you feel like there's some gaps in my skill set? Good. Great question. Thank you for that. Do ask about the next steps. Don't be left hanging. A lot of people I know that have been on interviews have finished those interviews only to not know whether they're going to get a call back or whether they're still under consideration. A week or two goes by and they don't know what to do. So I would definitely say, ask, can you tell me what your timeline is and what the next steps will be? Unless, of course, they've already covered that in the interview. Do state your enthusiasm at the end of the interview. Do say, I've really enjoyed my time speaking with you. I'm more enthusiastic than ever about the position and would really welcome the chance to work with your company. As much as you may feel like coming to the interview, talking about all these things, the interviewer should know this about you. Believe me, they want to hear you say it. So do be sure to say that at the very end. Thank them in person. And if it's a virtual interview, an email is an appropriate way for you to respond. But make that email count. In other words, don't make it like, thanks for the interview today. Sincerely, Lisa Littlefield. It should say more than that. I enjoyed talking to you about this. I was excited to hear about this. I would be happy to continue the interview process with you. I'm available at your convenience. And thank them, at the end of that note. If you need help writing that note, we're happy to help you write that notice too, as well too. So I think that just about covers everything that we have to talk about. Phone interviews are much the same as your video interviews, quality of reception. If you can use a landline, even though they're not that common anymore, oftentimes there's a lot more clarity on a telephone that's a hardwired phone versus a cell phone. But if you are using a cell phone, just make sure you're in a quiet place, that you're ready to devote your full attention to those questions. Here's another question that came in. So the thank you email would be appropriate only if the interview is online. How about if it is face-to-face? Yes, send a handwritten note can be sent for a virtual interview, but let's face it, under our current situation, people are not going into their offices to check their mail, so the mail is more important now than ever. You can send an email and a handwritten note, even for an in-person interview. So an email immediately after the interview is appropriate, and then a short handwritten note that expresses, once again, your ongoing kind of interest is appropriate too. Good questions. Once again, the business dress, even if you're on the phone and they're not seeing you, may make you feel more confident. You may want to stand up while you're doing the interview. Sometimes when you're sitting, people tend to lose a little bit of energy. Toward the end of an interview, especially if it's been about an hour, people do tend to lose their energy. So do pace yourself as you're going through the interview process and try to keep that energy level up to the best of your ability. Pets, kids, traffic, doorbells ringing, notifications on your email, all of those things should be shut down during the video interview as well as during the phone interview. So I think that we are at the end of our slides and our conversation. Do you guys have any other questions for me? I'm going to see if I can share my screen with you right now. And there you go. Thanks for being with us today. Once again, careers@hood.edu is the way to make an appointment or to speak to any of us about specific questions coming out of this program. For everybody who participated today, we will be sending you an email with a link to the recording. So thanks so much. It's been a pleasure presenting the information, and I hope it was super helpful. Take care. Bye-bye.